afternoon and welcome to our series Diplomacy, Your Question, Our Answers. Today we are dealing with the diplomatic service and we'll have a look behind the curtains, a peek behind the curtains as we call this session, how to organize a modern diplomatic service. And it's a pleasure to welcome those who are doing it in the case of Austria. So welcome to Romana Königsbrun. She's Director of Human Resources at the Foreign Ministry, and welcome to Julia Thallinger, who is responsible for recruitment and the family office. And I also welcome Rudolf Schatz. Rudolf Schatz is a MAIS 2 student at the Diplomatic Academy. I'm very convinced that diplomacy has a role to play, which is maybe even more important than in the history when we look into the changes in the global world order that we see. There is no stable world order because there are so many changes, technological changes, geopolitical changes, and the diplomatic service has to respond to this. And in the case of Austria, I give you just two examples, and I guess they will be discussed later on as well. One of the examples is that Austria has a digital envoys sitting in Silicon Valley in San Francisco, to be more precise, working on the relations between the huge tech companies and Austria in both directions concerning the Austrian companies there and the tech companies from the Silicon Valley in Austria. And this is part of our government program, the new government program. The Foreign Ministry will have a green envoy at the Foreign Ministry. And I'm very happy to say that this is a very good sign how fast the Foreign Ministry in Austria can respond to all of this. But having said this, I'm now eager to hear from those doing all these things and making the Austrian Foreign Service a dynamic and modern diplomatic service. And without further ado, I pass on to our moderator, to Rudolf Schatz. And I wish us all a very, very interesting and I hope partly also funny discussions about modern diplomacy in Austria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Brix, for your welcome remarks. I also want to welcome everyone who joined us today to the new series of Diplomacy, Your Questions, Our Answers. Today's topic is a peek behind the curtain, how to organize a modern diplomatic service. Again, we're having with us today Mrs. Ambassador Magister Königsbrun, the Director of Human Resources and Deputy Director General for Administrative Affairs at the Austrian MFA. And Magister Thallinger, the Head of Unit for Recruitment and Family Office. You may allow me to briefly introduce our distinguished guests. To begin with, before having entered the MFA in 1996, Mrs. Königsbrun acquired a Magister in English and History and directly joined the DA for the diploma program after that. Within the ministry, she held already several positions, from Deputy Permanent Representative at the UN in Vienna to Director of the Austrian Cultural Forum in Istanbul. And since December 2019, she holds her current position. As Magister Thallinger has a Master of Laws degree and also acquired a LLM in International Legal Studies. She joined the MFA in 2005 and worked also in different positions like a secretary at the Permanent Mission of Austria to the UN in New York and as counselor at the Permanent Mission of Austria to the UN in Geneva. Again, thank you very much for joining us today. And I now may give the floor to Mrs. Königsbrun for her presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador, for your kind introductory words. It's a pleasure for us to be here. Thank you to our moderator who kindly introduced us and will help us to organize this session. As has already been outlined and briefly mentioned by Ambassador Brix, that we are trying always to adjust to the changes that are happening in the world all the time. We try to be a dynamic, modern diplomatic service, but we also have our roots. And I think this is also very important, especially being here now at this long established traditional institution like the Vienna School of International Studies, the Diplomatic Academy. I have very good memories myself of my time here, so I really appreciate this opportunity. And I think our close links in terms of the ministry and these institutions have always been there, and they are still here in the present. And this is a very important aspect also always in our work. For instance, when you just to even a connection nowadays, whenever we leave our Secretary General's office at the ministry, there are some nice big portraits of a former director, I believe, and of a former student, I think from the 18th century, 19th century. So it's always nice to have these very close connections between our two institutions. And so I think, as an introduction, I would ask my collaborator Julia, who joined the personnel department earlier this year, and she's now our first family officer, which is, I think, a very important position to hold. And she's also head of our recruitment unit, very busy at the moment. And she will also try to give some historic introduction to our foreign service, to the Austrian Foreign Service. Thank you. Julia, would you like to continue?
Thank you very much, Romana, and I hope that everybody can hear me well. Thank you very much also from my side to the director, Ambassador Brix, and to the Diplomatic Academy in general for hosting us here today. It's a real pleasure for us to have the opportunity to present a bit more our own diplomatic service and the challenges that we're facing, and what it actually means to structure and organize a modern diplomacy nowadays. We have seen that in the context of the series of these discussions at the Diplomatic Academy, you have often heard from academics and from professors. Just to underline that we're speaking to you today here as practitioners, we're not academics, and in this sense we will not have an academic discussion about where diplomacy is going or should be going, but rather really on how to organize and how to structure modern diplomatic services. As Romana has already said, we're really interested in having a discussion that is as interactive as possible with all of you who are listening today. So please feel free to stop us and to ask your questions also in between. We're more than happy to let the discussion go in whatever direction you want to take it. And now, as Romana has indicated, we thought that to start off our conversation today, it might be quite interesting to give you just a very brief historic overview of how diplomatic services have come along. And I will give you a couple of pieces of information so that you can also have a bigger picture and see from which routes we have developed, so to speak. So originally and for a long time, the diplomatic representatives have belonged to the royal or noble families. They have been direct representatives of the sovereign ruler or the monarch. On the one hand, because it was only the representatives, the members of royal families who really had the education and the knowledge that was necessary to exercise some form of diplomatic function, but also because they had the necessary financial means in order to conduct such a profession. The origins of the consular function have been a bit different in the sense that from the beginning of consular activity, consular functions were always closely tied to trade and commerce, and required really a substantial knowledge of the local situation, of the local environment, also the economic environment. So in that sense, originally the consular functions have rather been entrusted to personalities who have been locally embedded and who knew the local situation very well, and who were usually in the past doing this on a honorary capacity. Now, it was only towards, in the course of the 19th century and towards the end of the 19th century that European countries realized that the diplomatic functions and the consular functions could not be entirely separated, that there was quite some overlap, and that every form of consular activity also had some diplomatic implications. So it was then towards the end of the 19th century that those two functions started to be merged. This merger went also hand in hand with reforms, and that was indeed so in times of the Austrian-Hungarian monarchy, but also beyond the K&K monarchy, reforms in order to create a professional public administration and to create a modern civil service system. And Romana has already alluded to the close ties that have always existed between the Diplomatic Academy and its predecessor and the Austrian Foreign Service. So the Diplomatic Academy and its predecessor, the Consular Academy, have always played a very important role in providing well-trained, well-educated civil servants to the Austrian Public Service and certainly also to the Foreign Ministry. Just to give you maybe an indication of the dimension, also to be able to compare it to where we stand nowadays, towards the end of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, shortly before the outbreak of World War I, the monarchy had already quite an elaborate system of representations worldwide. Just to give you some figures, there were already over 30 diplomatic missions, and what I think is quite impressive, over 400, well over 400 consulates around the world. The vast majority of them were honorary consulates, but nevertheless, I think this is a span of a network that was quite impressive already at the beginning of the 20th century. And maybe just for you to know, in the past, but also nowadays, the diplomatic services, as they have evolved, they have significant similarities around the world. That was true in the past and also nowadays. Of course, every service has its own specificities, but overall, one can say that there are marked similarities between in the way that they are organized and that they are operating. And with that, I hope I have laid a little bit of a groundwork to hand over to Romana to give you some interesting facts and insights on how a modern civil service is organized.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you for this introduction. I would move now more to the present and shortly present our ministry structure or our missions abroad as we have them now. Our diplomatic missions abroad, we have about 100, more or less, which has been constant for a while with ups and downs, but it's 100. And also we try to incorporate, as Ambassador Brix was mentioning, also newer forms of diplomatic representations, like Martin Rauchbauer, who is heading the Open Austria consulate, as we call it now, in San Francisco also, and doing also this art and tech lab activities there, and very much at the forefront of the digital development. And I think this is also how we try to also collaborating closely with our trade chambers. So I think it's important to always try to be flexible as far as a government public institution which has legal frameworks which we have to respect. So we cannot always be as fast and as flexible maybe as private partners can, but we really trying to also open up space for new projects of that kind, be it this tech ambassador initiative, or being also in terms of cybersecurity. We'll also have a representative dealing with cybersecurity and cyber issues in foreign affairs, specialized on that soon. So at the moment, it's mainly, of course, still traditional bilateral embassies that are the majority of our missions, and some permanent representations, consulates general, which are also very important. Also, as we saw during the times of the crisis, that the consular services in particular have been very much at the forefront together with our embassies. We also have cultural fora, as I was heading the one in Istanbul, as our moderator already mentioned. It's also part of the Austrian, I think Emil can very much sympathize, as he was Director General for Culture for a good time and did a great job. So I think especially in the Austrian image abroad is very much linked to culture. So this is also maybe more than for other countries. We try to project this also abroad in certain countries. And I think we have about 30 cultural fora abroad, some linked closer to embassies, some have an independent structure, like for instance, our very known cultural forum in New York, which is a landmark building also. And also what we have, maybe linking to what Julia says, we have 340 honorary consulates also worldwide still, linking up to all traditions. This is a way, these are not people that are civil servants, this is business people, these are friends of Austria, this is sometimes nationals of that host country who feel connected to Austria either by studies or by marriage or by their trade ties. And in this sense, we make use of this resource as like an antenna for us. They help us if we have somebody in prison. They connect us to the business world. They're important partners. And so we, being a small to medium-sized country, we cannot be everywhere. But with these honorary consulates, we can really outreach. And so our resource for us, and I think this works very well. And these partners really are a very good institution, and they do this on a voluntary basis, and so it's really we're trying to keep the links close so that they also feel appreciated for the important work these honorary consuls do all over the world. Let me briefly come to staff. This is like I'm heading our department for personnel, which is of course something very dear to my heart. Has always been. I worked here before at this department when I was in Julia's position. So I think this is has been an important issue always and will always be. We have a number of we have about 1,000. Between 1,100 and 1,200 staff at the moment. This is people who work, it's almost roughly half of them work abroad, half of them work at our headquarters in Vienna. And in addition to this number, we have 840 or so local staff abroad. So we also have this significant number of people who work as translators, as all kinds of assistants and drivers, whatever is needed at our embassies abroad to function properly. And these are also an important resource for us, even if they are not based in Austria, but it's an important issue, and also for us to keep track with these different. They have, of course, they are employed on local rules. So you also have all these local legal systems to take into account, and so it's also challenging in terms of human resources and in kinds of issues that arise, be it from insurance to all kinds of questions. But it's been a very successful, I think, cooperation with our local staff all over. Maybe one detail which made, I don't, we don't stick out very much as the foreign service in this context. All the public administration in Austria, the average age, I don't know if you had an audience here, I would ask who wants to guess what is the average age. It's difficult to do this on this online version, but it's about 49 years of age. So we are not as young as we would like to be. So what we do to compensate a little bit for this is that we try to get the younger generation, apart from them joining us on the proper way. I think Julia will later talk about this process. But it's also, we also have this quite big opportunity for young professionals or future professionals to work as an intern, a paid intern, with either at the headquarters in Vienna or abroad at our embassies. And we have a quite considerable number, and we do also quite a elaborate process of recruiting also for our interns. And so I think I also welcome everybody who's interested to try to apply for our internships, because you get the chance to have a look at the ministry from inside, work in different areas, usually wherever we think it's useful to have a young colleague to see the work and to also assist us. It's very important also to give us the ideas of how, as I said, as we are not as young as we should be. I think this is also a very important aspect in our work, to have these young people on board. And some of them decide this was interesting, I want to do something else. But there's also a considerable number who gets interested in staying with us and who try it and do, and usually very many of them also pass the entrance exam and join us on a more permanent basis. Then maybe a few more issues, because one of the things why our personnel department in the foreign service and in all foreign services is usually quite large compared to the size of the ministry is due to the fact of the rotations we have to, or we want to, and we are happy to administer, but there's many. So we have a lot of vacancy notices. We sort of look for. Every year we have a big rotation for the heads of mission, for ambassadors, consul generals. Our one is ongoing right now, but also for our younger colleagues who go abroad for the first time. all kinds, also for our consular administrative staff and just as well for our support staff. So we have in the different areas of our staff in the different categories, we have a big rotation exercise. This amounts to a few hundred rotations every year. So you can imagine then in times of COVID, as we have it now, it has been quite a challenge to carry it through, but overall with some delays or some flights that were cancelled, but generally we managed to carry it out, and which was very important for us because of course people have schooling issues and so on, all the things that Julia will talk about later as our family officer. But it's quite complex but as we have a lot of practice also, it's been possible to have this rotation exercise as planned. In terms of budget, maybe just a few numbers. Our budget is about 500 million euros every year. It's as I said, we are not a big ministry overall. What we have, where we are quite big, is in terms of infrastructure abroad, because we have a lot of either properties or rented buildings that we use for our representations, and this is a complex issue to manage. So the personnel department is part of a bigger directorate general, and this directorate general is comprised not only of the personnel department, also a department for the protection of our staff in terms of health and so on, but also of our infrastructure units that are very important. They manage these our estates or all the things that are either owned by the Republic of Austria or that are rented abroad. There's always things to repair, to organize, to optimize. It's also quite a complex issue. And also the IT department is also in our Directorate General. And last but not least, of course, budget. So also very important, also the budget resorts to the Directorate General for Administrative Affairs, where we're also part of this, quite large due to all these internal functions. It's more like the engine room of the whole ministry. So to enable all our colleagues that are working on the more political front, the multilateral missions and so on, to have the right environment to be able to do their work in a professional and efficient function. In my personnel department, apart from Julia, who does the recruitment and the family office, there's also one colleague who is in charge of personnel issues for the diplomatic staff. That is people who are usually academic, who have to be academics, and many of them also pass the diploma or the MAIS course at the Diplomatic Academy. And there's also one colleague who is in charge of consular, administrative and support staff, and also for the rotation. We also deal with one person deals with individual staff matters. This is leaves of absence. We have a lot. I don't know, as you can imagine, many of our staff members, also more than in other ministries, work for the UN, for the OSCE. We have people at the External Action Service, and they need an leave of absence, and all this also has to be administered in terms of their pension requirements and so on. So it's also a complex issue, and remuneration also. And also personal development and training. I think that's also a very important unit, which I think deserves even more attention in the future. And then there's one unit that deals only with local staff, because this is a growing issue, and there's getting more and more complex also in terms of legal requirements. And we have a registry office, because we need to know where our people are when they move, when they come back, and so on. So this is also important in terms of administration. Maybe I'll give over to Julia now to explain a bit more about recruitment, which I think could be of interest to many of our of the students here, also maybe for other people who are listening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Romana. And I'm just looking at our moderator, Rudolf, to see if there are any questions in the meantime, or whether you want us to continue.
Sorry, I just lost my internet connection. But yeah, we have like one comment on the cooperation between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the federal provinces. If you have maybe some remarks on that, like between the functioning of this cooperation, whether if it's just only on tourism, culture, and business, or if you have any remarks on that.
I think it's an important area, and I think we are also trying to elaborate or work closer on this issue, because in terms of culture, there's a lot of cooperations already, as you were hinting at, because when I was also working in the cultural field, we have people who do who go on these scholarships or other residencies for painters or different types of cultural activities. And then we work closely with the Bundesländer, but it could also be developed even further. I think now the focus is mainly on cultural issues, the cooperation, I think. But I think there is an interest to go further from our side in different areas. Also, for instance, in Brussels at our mission, you also have the representatives of the federal provinces. But I think in certain cases there is already a cooperation and it works very well. But I think we need also, in terms of resources, it could be interesting for us, because they bring their own angle. They have in terms of staff, other priorities, and it can be a good cooperation, I think. But this is still, I think, can be enlarged, to be honest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I now hand over to Julia?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. So I'll be happy to talk a little bit more about the recruitment and the staff at our foreign ministry and what we're trying to do. Now, most diplomatic services have professional recruitment processes, and so do we. Ours is already quite established and goes back a long way. It's a very comprehensive recruitment process that not only goes for the diplomatic staff, but also for the consular and administrative staff and technical and support staff. Where we have multi-stage recruitment processes that take actually a couple of months. They take place in irregular intervals because it always depends on how many open spaces we have at the foreign ministry. Unlike in the private sector, there are quite strict limitations to how many people can be employed at a certain point in time. So we have our own limitations here in terms of how many staff we can actually take on board every year, every couple of years. And then our recruitment processes are also to a certain extent provided for and guided by law. So we're not completely free to do and to proceed however we want. Many of this is really set in law. Now I'll give you a brief overview of how our recruitment processes work for the diplomatic staff. I'll not spend too much time on that, but maybe it's quite interesting for some of you. If there are further questions, then I'll be very happy to expand a little bit more in detail later on. So for the diplomatic staff, our recruitment process actually takes a couple of months. Right now, we're in the middle of one of them, although COVID-19 is making it a little bit more difficult than we had hoped for, but that's the way it is right now. Our recruitment process starts off with a series of written tests where we're analyzing the skills and the knowledge in a broad number of areas ranging from foreign policy, history, EU, culture, of course, and other important aspects to the work of the foreign ministry, such as public international law, European law, etc. So on the one hand, we really assess the hard facts, the hard skills and the knowledge. On the other hand, we assess the intellectual capabilities of our candidates, and then they are followed usually by a large number of language tests. As everybody knows, the command of foreign languages is something that is very important, of course, in any foreign service, and so is it in ours. So our stipulations are that people have to have a good command, a very good command of English, of course. That's the basics nowadays, but in addition to that, you need to have a very good fluent command of at least one other language that is part of the official UN languages. And if there is then more on top of that, that's of course only an asset. In addition to those tests, we are also looking at the personal side of our candidates by usually sending them through an assessment center that is quite specific in the sense that it looks more at the personality and at the character of the candidates in order to assess whether they have the soft skills that are necessary to exercise this kind of profession. And of course, we also want to see how persons and how candidates are reacting in situations that can be difficult. So they are deliberately being put in situations of stress. They are deliberately put in a situation where they are sleep deprived in order for us to be able to see how they react and how they function in those types of settings and challenges. If you have managed to get through all of those first steps, you are invited to come to a hearing in front of a panel at the Foreign Ministry, which is composed of the highest diplomats of the Foreign Ministry. So the head of that panel is usually the Secretary General of the Foreign Ministry, and the other members of the panel are Director Generals of the Foreign Ministry. I'm looking here at Ambassador Brix. He also was for a long time member on that panel and has extensive experience how those recruitment processes work in our system. Now, what is maybe quite interesting to stress is that the first part, until we get to the assessment center and to the panel, but the very first parts of those recruitment processes, and we're quite proud about that, is that they're anonymized. So actually, the people, the members of the panel who are assessing the quality of the work and of the skills of our candidates, they don't get to see the names. So basically, they have no idea who sat on those various tests. They just get to see the tests as such and have to assess them in a blind way. And of course, that is part of our system where we're working with a large team of career staff. And that is quite contrary to what is often known from discussions in the media, systems like the US State Department and the US Foreign Service, where they're operating with them, especially at the important and higher up positions, with a large number of political appointees. So in our system, that doesn't exist. So if you will ever encounter an Austrian ambassador in your travels or in your stays abroad, those are career diplomats. Those are people who have passed all the necessary examinations, but more than that, who have proven themselves on the job in Vienna, but then of course also abroad before being appointed ambassador of Austria. So once you have managed to come through the recruitment process and are taken on board, this is followed by a training on the job, where you will have different positions in Vienna, but also for a short term of usually 6 months abroad, in order to see how a person is actually developing on the job. And of course, this practical training is also supplemented by an academic training. And here again, the Diplomatic Academy comes into play as they're an important partner of the Foreign Ministry in order to help us train our own staff. I've already mentioned that this is one of the ties with the Diplomatic Academy. Many foreign services have their own academic or training institutions or have ties to some types of institutions like the Diplomatic Academy. The DA, but also its predecessor, the Consular Academy, have already had a long history of providing training and providing education to future civil servants and future diplomats. And that is, of course, still true today. The Diplomatic Academy, as most of you will probably know, is now, I think, for almost 25 years been a standalone, independent, public academic institution. But of course, close institutional ties to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs remain, and a certain number of the people who are successful in our recruitment processes tend to come from the Diplomatic Academy. We don't have a set quota, but of course, the Diplomatic Academy is a very good preparation in order to join the Foreign Service. Now, when it comes to staff and our recruitment processes, sometimes we receive the question to what extent there are affirmative action or to what extent there are certain quota to take on board minorities in our public service in the Foreign Ministry. Now, let me point out that we, as other parts of the Austrian public service, have an obligation of equal treatment and the prohibition of non-discrimination. So any type of discrimination on the basis of sex, sexual orientation, race, religion, age is of course prohibited. And that goes also for the Foreign Ministry, but there are specific tools in place specifically for women in order to enhance the share of women in our workforce. As you can imagine, the composition of the diplomatic staff has changed significantly over the course of time. And in the past and for a long time, in the distant past and for a long time, the diplomatic service was composed of male diplomats. Of course, that has changed in the last decades, thank God. However, it took quite a while for the change to take place, and the first woman to join the Austrian Foreign Service at the level of diplomat was actually doing so only in 1947, although in other parts of the civil service, female academics already had managed to join earlier. And I think also at the Diplomatic Academy and its predecessor, the Consular Academy, women were admitted as full students already earlier than that. So it took quite a while for women to be able to join as diplomats, but we have worked hard to remedy that situation over the past decades. And now at the level of diplomats, we have almost 40% who are women. And with the recruitment processes of the recent past, we can say that about half or even more than half of the people who are taken on board as diplomats are female. This is on the one hand because we receive a high number of applicants of women. In the recent past, the number tends to be a little bit higher than the applications we receive from men. On the other hand, we also have certain legal obligations in the public service to hire women who are equally qualified as men until we have reached a quota of 50% on all different levels. In terms of our ambassadors, Romana has already given you an overview of our diplomatic representations abroad. It's maybe interesting to know that about 33% of our ambassadors abroad right now are female. So there is still a bit room for improvement, but the Foreign Ministry has a number of tools in order to advance the situation of women, not only in the recruitment, but then also in the career development. And for example, and I'll not go into the details, that becomes quite technical, but for example, we have our own plan for the advancement of women in the Foreign Ministry, where we have set very concrete targets in terms of percentages that need to be fulfilled in order to succinctly raise the number of women in the diplomatic service in all different categories of employment. We also have our own working group, for example, on equality that deals not only with issues of gender equality, but any types of discrimination. So if employees feel that they are being discriminated against, either because they are a woman, or because of any other reasons, then this working group gives them a forum to address and to take up their complaints. For other minorities, we don't have a specific quota set in the Foreign Ministry because our legal framework doesn't really allow for that. But just to say, also with regard to LGBTI, members of the LGBTI community, we regularly receive the question, what is being done? So in terms of recruitment processes, I have tried to explain before, our system is quite blind in a sense that we don't look at sexual orientation, we don't look at religion, we don't look at ethnic origin. But once you're in the system, there is no discrimination. And for example, the same-sex couples in our system receive the exact same privileges that also heterosexual couples are receiving.
May I jump in with two short questions? We have received questions concerning the recruitment of young diplomats. You were talking about the comparison of the Austrian recruitment process and the schools and also with other countries. And so with the question, like, is the process of the recruitment and the further training of young diplomats in Austria comparable to other states in the European Union, for example?
Yes, thank you for that question, and I'm happy to answer that. So yes, I would say that typically the recruitment processes for diplomatic services in a number of European countries are quite similar in the sense that it's usually multi-stage processes. It's not the one simple exam and then you're through. You really have to get through a number of hurdles, if you so want, in order to be successful at the end, which also has to do that in most countries, public service in general, but then also the foreign service and the Foreign Ministry in particular has quite an appeal. So we are in the lucky situation that we receive a high number of applicants, and the same goes for many other Western European countries. So we also need a number of steps in our processes in order to be able to come from high number of applicants to the usually rather small number of persons that we are at the end of the process actually able to take on board. But what is quite similar is that there are multiple steps recruitment process processes. And then most, at least Western foreign services, to my knowledge, also have a system where you are admitted to the foreign service after the finishing the recruitment process, but then you still have to prove yourself for a certain amount of time. You have to undergo training on the job, academic training, and then usually most foreign services also have some type of other review instrument in order to see how the persons are then actually doing on the job. So in our case, it is another round of exams that people need to do. I know that, for example, in the Swiss system, there is continuous exams also to move up then later on in your career. That in our case doesn't exist, but some form of review also once you're in the system definitely exists.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a follow-up question. What are the important, since you said like there are many applications and only like a few, like a smaller group of people, of course, can only be admitted, what would you say are important qualities for the modern diplomatic service?
Happy to answer that. I'm speaking a lot. Maybe, I don't know if Romana or Ambassador Brix, who has been on the panel for a long time, can maybe answer that in a more detailed way than I can. I don't know, Ambassador, would you like to come in on that?
Well, if you want me, yes. The best quality that you need is your personality. You have really to prove that you understand what's going on at the present time, that you have an open mind, and that you are looking forward to be in a flexible atmosphere. So it's not really something that has to do a lot with pure knowledge. It's much more, it has to do with the skills to adapt to what is going on around us. So that is my experience also from the final commission, that we were always looking for the personality of people and not so much for knowledge.
So, and last but not least, Romana has already mentioned the family office at the beginning of her introductory remarks, and I'll be happy to compliment a little bit on that, because that's also a more recent development and something where the modern foreign services have seen that there is actually a need to act. And that relates to the specificities of our job, the fact that we're moving around basically every 4 or 5 years or so. At the face of it, it's very obvious when you apply to become a member of the diplomatic service, you know that you'll spend lots of your time abroad and that you'll be moving around. Personally, I find that the full weight of the decision of becoming a diplomat or joining the diplomatic service also on other levels is often understood only a little bit later on. Usually when the people join, they are quite young. The average age is about 28, 29. Some have partners, but not all. Most of the young colleagues don't have families. So of course they think about that, but the real implications are felt only a little bit later. Although I have the impression that the younger generations are better aware of what it actually means for them and also for their partners to join the diplomatic service than it was maybe in the past. The traditional concept of diplomatic service being composed by men, and they often had, of course, a wife, and then the wife would go with them abroad, and the job of the spouse would be to organize the life abroad and to take care of the children, and more than enough to do. But that was basically the very traditional and classic concept, and of course that has changed a lot, and our social realities, but also our economic realities are very different now. And the foreign services have realized that if they want to stay attractive as an employer, and if they want to be able to cater also to the needs of young talents, because as we all know, there is always a war for talents going on, and there is only so much in terms of carrots that the foreign service and the public administration can give to young people in terms of financial recompensation. We're quite limited here, but in order to stay attractive for us, we really need to be able to understand the impact that it has on the life on the private life and on the family life, and to create some policies and to do our own efforts in order to address and tackle the challenges that the spouses and the partners and the family members of our own officers have when they're going abroad. And now, when you as a diplomatic officer go abroad, you, of course, everything is new, but you always have your work environment and you start from there. Whereas the spouse, the partner, the family members, when they move along with you, they have to start everything afresh. I mean, they don't have anything. They need a command of the local language, otherwise they won't get by. They need to create their own networks. They need to start a new school. And for the partners, usually nowadays, they want to be able to pursue their own careers also when going abroad. The foreign ministries have come to realize that more needs to be done. And that's really in the last couple of years. So certain services have already existed for a long time. Not everything is new in that sense, but the foreign ministries have come to realize that more efforts were necessary in order to address those challenges. And that's where the creation of family offices has started in a number of Western European countries. And that's something that was also created in our own structure in the Austrian MFA last year, actually. And the idea of a family office is really to be able to better support the spouses and the partners and the family members with all the practical issues and problems they potentially can encounter when going abroad, moving abroad, but also when coming back from a long term abroad to Austria. And that is a broad range of very practical issues, ranging from questions related to social security and pensions to social benefits they are receiving, where it's not clear whether they're receiving it or not, as long as they're living abroad. We've experienced some problems here. Then, of course, very practical issues related to schooling questions for children. And for the spouses, the important question of access to the labor market. So that's something where the Austrian Foreign Ministry, but also other foreign ministries have tried to do a lot over the last couple of years. And where we have seen that by concluding what we call memoranda of understanding, which are political agreements with other countries, we can actually accelerate and facilitate the access of spouses and partners to the labor market. So Austria is concluding with country X political agreement saying if country X allows the spouses and the partners of Austrian diplomatic officials in country X, in Austria will do the same on the basis of reciprocity, for the spouses and partners of diplomats from country X coming to Vienna. And of course, that is a long process because all of those agreements need to be negotiated over quite a long time, but we have been able to conclude a number of those memoranda of understanding already, and more efforts are on the way to continue with that. And there we see that it can actually be of help. Of course, there is no guarantee that with those political agreements, spouses will be able to find a job, but at least it should facilitate their access to the local labor market. And then, of course, the family office is also trying to look at the broader picture of how to make the family life compatible with the work life. And here, I would say there have also been a number of developments and of efforts in the last couple of years, but they are not so specific to diplomatic service. There are similar efforts also in the private sector that are ranging from, allowing part-time work, ranging for more flexible working hours, or the possibility to work partly from home, not only in times of COVID-19. We have a workplace kindergarten, we have childcare programs during holidays, but again, all of this is intended to improve the compatibility between work and private life, to also advance the share of women who can work in responsible positions in the diplomatic service. But then again, that's not a particular specificity. I would say that's more part of the standard repertoire of any larger employer. So maybe I'll stop here. I don't know if Romana, from her much longer experience than I in this field, wants to add anything to recruitment or to the family office.
Thank you very much for this, for a short presentation. We have another new question coming. I think that recruitment is a special point of interest today. So we were talking about the necessity of being flexible, the flexibility within this career. So there's the question, what is more asked by the foreign ministry as an employer, being more a generalist or an expert, and how does this this ambiguity between being expert and generalist work in combination with the rotation principle?
Maybe I can answer this. Is this possible?
Of
Because I
course,
think
please,
this
please,
is
please come.
a very pertinent and very, very good question, because we are always facing this challenge also. I think we need both, really. I think generally it's generalists, generally, I mean, on the principle, because most of our posts you would need throughout your career work in very different settings, and to be flexible and to be, to a certain degree, a generalist, at least ready to be a generalist, because even our specialists at some point, if they, for instance, if they're specialists in international law, if they want to go and be an ambassador at some point, they still need to do the bilateral. They're still in charge of the consular issues and of all kinds of economic. So in a way, we have specialists in certain areas, especially, I don't know, disarmament, I think, is one area where we have people who have really managed to specialize. And of course, you have benefits from specialization also. So I think in a way, for a certain amount of people, these expert careers to some degree can work, but for the bigger part, it's still a generalist approach so far. But I think maybe Julia or Emil wants to add, but I think in the end, it's the skills-based approach that Emil was mentioning. I think that is very important, because we need this open approach to face all these challenges we had. Maybe I can just relate to these challenges we've had this year. I mean, we had a cyber crisis at the beginning of the year. So we had, and then we moved directly into the COVID-19 crisis, which meant for us, for ministry to with limited resources, to organize these evacuation flights that were well over 50 evacuation flights, the repatriation of thousands of Austrians, and also help to repatriate EU citizens. So it was a huge logistic and infrastructure task, and even people from completely different departments came together. We had people in the call center, we had people in the crisis, in our crisis meetings that were like twice a day for the intensive period. So I think a certain flexibility, certain skills are always very important. And if your passion for a certain field is very big, I think there will be a way to accommodate also that, is as long as this general principle is still there, and this general interest in international relations, whatever field you specialize in. And I'm also very grateful for this very passionate explanation I think Julia gave on this family officer thing, because I think the whole picture, we can speak about a very professional service, but people usually very rarely come alone. They come with some family setting, they come with all these things. So I think this is one of the issues we have to deal with more in the future, to modernize our service, to also look out for these issues. And also, I think training, on the job training for local staff, to intensify training, to have the more digitalized versions to allow. I think COVID-19 gave us the whole public service an impetus in this sense, and I think that's also very important for us to carry on with that. Although we still longing for the presence thing as well, which is part of our diplomatic work. I think this interpersonal skills is very important, and this is, of course, not the same doing it on an online and virtual version, but still, I think this is something we need to invest in more. And also, we could see from the crisis that, for instance, in terms of IT infrastructure, in terms of computers, laptops for our staff, of very modern smartphones, we've been investing a lot recently, just to be able to face these new challenges in a better way than before. But if there are other questions, I think this is now a good time also, if somebody wants to add from you.
Yeah, we have another question, like also regarding like internships, making the for.
May I add the first question? Only to support Romana there. The challenge is that you need generalists the smaller your foreign service is. And Austria is quite a small country, so we need more generalists than experts. If you are in a big foreign service, then the better chances for experts, I would say. And in general, what the ministry is looking for, and what they need also from my experience, is you need to learn how to manage things. So management qualities are the most important. That's why, for instance, at the Academy, we are doing also project management courses and things like that. So it's like for a government. Your ministers sometimes are experts in various fields, but those who are successful in most of all cases, successful because they know how to manage the ministry and not because they are medical doctors or something else.
Thank you very much for your remarks, Ambassador. We have another question, like again, regarding the recruitment, internships, but also like connected to the diversity of people within the foreign ministry and the people the ministry is looking for also an internship. So would you say that only like people from the Diplomatic Academy and the political science background are like wanted more or less by the foreign ministry, or is it open to a diverse background academically?
Can I start with that maybe, Julia, if you want to add something? I think in terms of internships, we're very open. We have all kinds of backgrounds. We have even IT specialists occasionally. Of course, the majority are either law students, economics, and also international development. We have a lot, and political science, of course, also a lot. But there is no languages, all kinds of... so I think in that area for the internships, people, cultural studies, all kinds of, I think people are usually come from very diverse backgrounds, which is good because they get a chance to see, and sometimes they see the ministry from inside, and we do not always put them in the most obvious department. You see somebody has done culture study, he has to be in the Director General for Culture. Sometimes we do that, but sometimes it turns out that if people do something completely different, it's actually very good for them because it expands the horizon, and they find it works quite often really well. I must say, not always maybe, but there's always the risk. So in a way, there is a lot of diversity in that sense. There's no limitations. And we also have taken on, even now, especially in this crisis, what we saw, that we should also take on people from the consular career that have not finished their studies, who have the A-level or they have the Matura, that they, if they want to see what the service is like, we're also offering internships for them. And they also work in our Director General for Consular Affairs or for Administrative Affairs. And they can also look inside and then try maybe the concours, our préalable, if they want.
Ms. Thallinger, do you have also some remarks on this issue?
Yeah, maybe I can just add to what Romana has already said. And now for our recruitment processes for the diplomatic level, in the past, it was limited by law actually to a number of fields of study, which were mainly law, political science, economy, and a few others. If candidates didn't have any diploma from those fields of study, then they needed to provide, in addition to their Magister, Master, a diploma from the Diplomatic Academy. A couple of years back, this has been become more flexible in recognition of the fact that actually we want more diversity among our staff. So now you still need to have an academic grade, of course, but it doesn't matter what field of study you have been in. So you need the level of a master or something corresponding, which can be also Fachhochschule in Austria, for example. And only if you don't have a master or higher, but rather a bachelor, then you would need also a diploma from the Diplomatic Academy or another equivalent postgraduate institution. But that was really in recognition of the fact that we need a diversity, and it's not helpful to only have lawyers and political scientists and maybe some economists. So now we have a broad diversity. We have engineers in our system. I mean, not saying that they are the vast majority, but we have engineers in our system. We have anthropologists. So I would say it's a good mix that makes that makes for a successful workforce.
Thank you very much. So far, we haven't received any new questions. Maybe also jump in with a personal question. Before, like you were talking about personal development and training. What skills would you say are currently or other ones the ministry tries to develop develop by its employees?
It's a very good question, and you're right. It's important to focus on these personal development issues. I think it's a bit. apart from the consular and all this, which has to do, which is also important, but I think we also need some training in terms of how to handle crisis, how to handle media in crisis. There's different aspects. I think we also collaborated with the Diplomatic Academy on certain aspects of that, I think, but also general also leadership skills, I think, is an important issue. Management skills, as the ambassador was saying before, it shows later when you're in management, you can work perfectly maybe in a different position, and then you have we have really quite complex tasks with teams, you know, the mixed teams. You have the local staff in certain countries with the staff from Austria, and there could be issues. There might be the environment is difficult. You know, the world is getting a more complex place, more challenges. So it's really these leadership skills also, I think, which are very important, and also starting from mid-career already, because in our system, even because we're not such a large foreign service, it means that already you have the chance relatively young to have management positions. So it means you need to develop the skills very early and carry on, and we should accompany this development. I think that's one issue which I regard as very important.
Thank you very much. Like a last question, like to close our talk today, maybe if you both could share briefly, like one of your best experiences of your career as your posting, or challenging tasks of your position, something brief to sum up today.
It's a nice question, but not so easy to answer. But if I very spontaneously I think it's always the first posting is maybe for many people the most exciting, because everything's the first time. And in my case, I went with my family to Kenya. We were posted in Nairobi on our first posting, and I think it was a very good experience altogether. Not always easy, because you have all these challenges. So I think this was for me, I think, one of those members when you go there for the first time, when you go with, for instance, in Nairobi, you have also the United Nations, so you also are the deputy representative to the UN and so on, and so to have these challenges, and at the same time a very rewarding environment, I think, for young diplomats. So I'm always very much in favor to have people also not go only to European postings, but also, especially when they're young, when maybe it's even still easier to experience also a completely different cultural setting with all the benefits you have from that.
Okay,
Julia,
thank you.
maybe you want to add?
Yeah, indeed, it's a good question, and thanks for that. So I'll start the other way around. Negative experiences, I mean, you know, there are ups and downs in every job, but overall, I wouldn't say that I've had any negative experience so far, and I'm very grateful for that. Positive experiences, there have been plenty, and really going abroad and being able to work for your country abroad in different environments is a fascinating experience. I have worked mainly in the multilateral field, to the representations to the UN in Vienna, New York, and Geneva. That's something that I've absolutely loved and I'm very passionate about, and I've learned tremendously. But I think what is interesting, or what has been an interesting fact for me to realize, is apart from work, how the environment influences you, your character, and your personality. And actually, even if my postings in the US and in Switzerland were not such culturally different environments as the ones that Romana has alluded to, I find it always fascinating how the culture that you're in and where you're actually trying to blend in, at the end of the day, has an impact on you, has a lasting impact on you. And that's something that you sometimes only realize once you're back from your posting. So you move then from one posting to another, and then you realize what influences a country, a culture, a society have had on you, and how this is actually contributing to the person that you are. And that's, I think, one of the most fascinating takeaways on a personal level, also for me.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ambassador Brix, do you have also maybe like you have the ability to look back at your career within the Foreign Service? Do you agree with that? Do you share their opinions, or do you have other remarks or memories you want to share with us, like to close the session today?
Well, thank you. There are too many stories, actually. I could relate here, and I don't want to be too long because we have our speakers here. What I recommend is that if you keep something in this career, that of being an anarchist is very important. I know people normally say anarchy is beautiful but not practical. But my experience is sometimes in bureaucracies, and also the foreign ministry is a bureaucracy, some sort of sense like a spice of anarchy is very good and may help you even if there are difficult situations. So don't take me too seriously when I ask for anarchists to apply for a career in the foreign service, but I mean it. Thank you to Romana, and thank you to Julia.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure for us to be here, even if it's only virtually. Thank you.
Thank you very much also from my side. It was a true pleasure.
So I also want to thank you for your interesting presentations, for your remarks, and I also hope that we could answer like the questions asked. And again, thank you very much for joining in, and goodbye.